The summer heat settled over Elmswood like a wool blanket, thick and heavy. That kind of Midwest July that clings to your skin and makes every memory smell like cut grass and old wood. On the edge of town, just beyond the train tracks, sat a crumbling house with peeling blue paint and a rusted swing set out front that hadn't creaked in years. It was here that Ray Delgado, 63, sat alone on his porch, nursing a lukewarm cup of instant coffee and staring out at the silence. He lived alone now. The house, once filled with the chaos of children's laughter and his mother's cooking, had grown still after the years had taken most of those voices away. He reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a photo, creased and faded, of him and his brother Manny, arms slung over each other's shoulders, grinning with missing teeth and scraped knees. 1967. Back when things were simple. Before the streets started talking louder than their mother's prayers. Ray ran his thumb over Manny's face. His baby brother never made it past 17. A soft gust of wind blew through the dying sycamore tree in the front yard, and Ray closed his eyes. People in Elmswood still crossed the street when they saw him coming. Some never forgot. Others never forgave. But today was different. Today marked 30 years since he walked out of prison. And tomorrow, he was being honored at City Hall, for service to the community. Life, it seemed, still had a few twists left. Back in 1972, Elmswood was a town torn between the past and the present. The steel mill was coughing its last breaths, Vietnam was winding down, and the American dream felt like a bedtime story no one believed in anymore. That's when Ray, barely 17, stopped dreaming altogether. His father had come back from Vietnam with more ghosts than medals, silent, angry, a man who no longer looked you in the eye. And his mother, sweet Lourdes, tried to hold the family together with rosaries and fried plantains. But prayers don't pay rent. And Ray, being the oldest, figured it was his turn. That's when the Vipers found him. They weren't a gang, not at first, more like a group of boys trying to feel strong in a world that made them feel small. Ray didn't join for the violence. He joined for the brotherhood. The colors, the code, the sense that someone had your back. But that feeling doesn't last long on streets that aren't paved with mercy. By the time he was 21, Ray had a reputation. Knives, fists, silence. He'd been in and out of juvenile hall, then county. One night changed everything. A liquor store, a shout, a flash, and a body on the floor. Manny had begged him not to go that night. Ray remembered every detail. The blood, the sirens, the look in his mother's eyes when she visited him in lockup. She never said a word. Just held his hand and whispered prayers in Spanish. It would be 12 years before he saw the outside world again. Ray always said prison doesn't break you. It just strips you down to who you really are. The concrete walls don't lie. The bars don't bend. And at night, when the lights click off and the voices echo through cold steel, the only voice left is your own. The day he walked out of Folsom State Prison in '85, the California sun hit his face like judgment. His shoes didn't fit right anymore. The world had kept spinning without him. Music had changed, presidents had changed, even slang had changed. But what hadn't changed was the name Delgado. And in a town like Elmswood, people don't forget names. Ray didn't expect a parade. But he did hope for something, a moment maybe, where someone would look him in the eye and say, "You're different now." That moment never came. His mother had passed while he was still inside, a heart attack. The guilt hit harder than the sentence ever did. His father had vanished years earlier. And Manny had died before Ray ever went in. Stabbed in a fight over someone else's mistake. Ray hadn't even known until months later, when a dusty letter finally made it through the prison mailroom. So he came home to an empty house and a world that had no use for him. The only welcome he got was from a grizzled man with one leg and a smoker's cough, Hank Lawson, a Vietnam vet who ran the local junkyard and knew a thing or two about second chances. "You want work or sympathy?" Hank had asked, flicking ash from his cigarette. Ray looked him square in the eye. "Just work." And with that, a new chapter began, slow, uncertain, but his. The junkyard smelled like motor oil and rusted dreams. Rows of broken-down cars, busted appliances, and warped bicycles sat under the relentless Midwest sun like forgotten stories. But to Ray, that place became sacred. It was where no one asked questions. Where your past didn't matter as much as your willingness to get your hands dirty. Hank didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were heavy with truth. He'd been through hell in Da Nang, come home to protests and spit, and never quite fit in after that. But he saw something in Ray, maybe a fellow broken soldier in a different kind of war. Ray worked 12-hour days, 6 days a week. No complaints. He swept the lot, fixed alternators, hauled scrap, even welded when Hank trusted him with a torch. The soles of his boots wore thin, his hands cracked and bled, but every drop of sweat washed a little more of the past away. And then came Sunday mornings. Hank would open late, so Ray walked. Through the park, past the little brick church where he and Manny once lit candles for their papa. He'd sit on the far bench, beneath a willow tree, watching families come and go, children running, couples laughing, old men feeding birds. He didn't speak. He just watched. Sometimes he felt like a ghost. Like the town was moving in fast forward while he stayed paused, stuck between who he'd been and who he was trying to become. But the strangest thing happened one Sunday. A little girl, no more than 6, broke away from her parents and came right up to him. Her hair in braids, her face smudged with chocolate. "Why you so sad, mister?" she asked. Ray didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to him like that in years. "I'm not sad," he finally said. "Just thinking." She smiled wide. "My daddy says thinking too much makes your head hurt." Then she ran off laughing. Ray didn't know why, but he laughed too. First time in years. By 1987, Ray had found a rhythm. It wasn't much: work, home, walk, sleep, but it kept the demons quieter than they used to be. Still, there were reminders everywhere. In Elmswood, memory clung to the walls like faded paint. He avoided the south side of town, too many faces from the old life. Faces that knew him when he was a viper, when his hands weren't used for fixing things but for breaking them. But sometimes, life didn't care what you were trying to forget. One Thursday evening, Ray walked into Meyer's grocery, same place he and his mama used to shop when he was a kid. The bell above the door jingled, and the smell of lemon cleaner and ripe bananas filled the air. He didn't see her at first. Not until he turned down aisle 3. There she was, Lupe Morales. The last time Ray had seen her, they were teenagers. She was holding Manny's hand, crying over his body in the ER hallway while Ray sat in cuffs. She looked older now, of course. Silver in her hair, worry lines that hadn't been there before. But her eyes, those same deep brown eyes, locked onto his. For a moment neither spoke. Ray nodded slowly. "Lupe." Her lips tightened. She clutched her cart like a shield. "Raymond. I didn't know you were still in town. I never left. Some of us had to raise families. Barry loved once." Ray looked down. "I never got to say I was sorry. For Manny. For everything." She stared at him, unmoved. "Sorry doesn't bring people back. It doesn't give kids their uncle or a mother her son." "I know," he whispered. "I live with that every day." There was silence, thick and uncomfortable. Then, just before she walked past him, she stopped. Her voice was softer now. "I heard you're working. That you're different." "I'm trying." She nodded barely. "Try harder." And just like that, she was gone. That night, Ray sat at his kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator his only company. He reached into the top drawer of the old hutch and pulled out a bundle wrapped in twine, yellowing envelopes, some bent, some stained, all sealed. Dozens of them. Letters he had written while locked up. Every one addressed to Manny. He never mailed a single one. Ray untied the bundle, hands shaking slightly, and picked one at random. The date on it was March 18th, 1979. His 5th year inside. He opened it carefully and began to read aloud, his voice gravelly, worn. Manny. I dreamt about the alley again. About the way you looked at me the night you tried to stop me from going out. I remember your hand on my shoulder, your voice. You always sounded older than you were. Like you knew too much. I should have listened. You weren't just my little brother. You were my compass, and I threw you away like a busted watch. Ray paused, the words catching in his throat. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and kept reading. Ma wrote me. Said you were helping her more. That you stayed out of the mess I dragged us into. I wish I could say I'm proud of you. But all I feel is shame. I'm sorry, Manny. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't know if I'll ever get out. But if I do, I promise I'll make it right. Ray folded the letter back up slowly. But the truth was, he knew he couldn't make it right. Not really. There's no going back. But maybe he could build something in Manny's name. Something that mattered. He stared at the stack of letters, a lifetime of guilt, paper thin and ink-stained. And somewhere in that quiet kitchen, an idea began to take root. By 1990, the junkyard had become more than just a place to work. It was Ray's anchor. He and Hank had grown close, like two battered wolves watching each other's backs. They didn't talk much about the past. But some mornings, before the welders kicked on, they'd share coffee and sit in silence that said more than words ever could. Hank's limp had gotten worse. The VA doctor said it was nerve damage, something about old shrapnel pressing against bone. Ray offered to drive him to appointments, even made sure the truck stayed running. But Hank, stubborn to the end, just grunted and said, "If it breaks down, I'll crawl." One morning in late September, Ray found him slumped in the office chair, eyes closed, cigarette burned down to the filter. He didn't call 911 right away. He just sat there next to him, quietly. "Thanks," Ray whispered, "for seeing more in me than I saw in myself." The funeral was small, a few vets, one distant cousin and Ray. They folded the flag, handed it to Ray with gentle hands. No family showed up. No pastor spoke. But Ray did. He stood at the edge of the grave, heart pounding. "Hank Lawson didn't have much," he said, voice low. "But what he gave me saved my life. He gave me a shot when no one else would. When the whole town saw a criminal, he saw a man. I won't forget that. And I'll pay it forward. That's a promise." A gust of wind kicked up dust and dead leaves. In that moment, Ray realized something. Hank had passed him the torch. And it was time he did something with it. Ray never sold the old house. Even after his mother passed and the walls began to sag and crack with time, he couldn't bring himself to let it go. He patched the roof when he could, replaced broken steps, painted over the graffiti some punk kids left one night. But he never lived there again. Not really. It was like a museum of memory, frozen in time. But something changed after Hank died. Ray found himself standing in the middle of that dusty living room, staring at the faded photograph of Manny on the mantel. He could almost hear their voices, his mother humming over a hot stove, Manny pretending his school books were footballs. The warmth was still there, hidden beneath the silence. That night, Ray sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. He started sketching out ideas. A youth center. A community space. A safe place for kids who were lost like he once was. He wrote one word at the top of the page. Manny's. Over the next few weeks, Ray talked to the city clerk, applied for permits, and met with nonprofits who could help. Most were skeptical. "You're Ray Delgado, right?" one man asked, eyes narrowing. "The Viper guy?" "I was," Ray said calmly. "Now I'm just a man trying to keep another kid from ending up where I did." Slowly, doors began to crack open. Not wide, but just enough to slip through. He knew this wouldn't erase his past. But maybe it could honor Manny's future, the one he never got to have. And maybe, just maybe, the house could be full of life again. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when it's about a Delgado. By early 1991, Whispers began creeping through Elmswood like smoke. The old Delgado place was getting cleaned up. The gangbanger had plans for it. Some thought it was a scam. Others figured he was running drugs again. But a few, a quiet, hopeful few, started to believe the man might be trying to build something good. Ray didn't waste time arguing with folks. He just kept working. Days were spent scraping, hammering, painting, patching drywall with cracked hands and borrowed tools. At night, he fell into bed sore and exhausted, but lighter somehow. Like each hour he spent rebuilding, the house chipped away at the weight he'd carried for decades. Still, there were hard moments. One afternoon, while hauling out rotted floorboards, a rock crashed through the front window. A voice from the street shouted, "Once a viper, always a viper!" followed by laughter and the screech of tires. Ray stood frozen for a moment, glass glittering at his feet. The old Ray, the one with a switchblade in his pocket and fire in his gut, would have chased that car down. But the man he was now just swept up the glass and kept going. Later that week, he received a handwritten letter in the mailbox outside the house. No return address. Just one sentence. "You're not the only one trying." Inside the envelope was a crayon drawing of the house, with stick figures smiling out the windows. One had an A tag. It read, "Mr. Ray." He stared at it for a long time, then pinned it to the new drywall in the front room. Hope, it seemed, had quietly started to come home. In the crisp morning light of November 1991, Ray found himself sitting stiffly in the cramped meeting room of Elmswood's City Hall. The smell of old coffee and polished wood filled the air as council members shuffled papers and whispered among themselves. This wasn't some courthouse or jailhouse, but the weight felt just as heavy. The mayor, a sharp-eyed woman named Gloria Bennett, tapped her pen on the table. "Mr. Delgado," she began, voice polite but guarded. "We've all heard the rumors. Your past is complicated." Ray nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. "I won't pretend it isn't. But I want to hear from you. Why should the city support your project? Why trust a man with a history like yours?" The room was silent, waiting. Ray looked around, then down at his callous hands. "Because I know what it means to lose your way. I know what it feels like to be forgotten, by family, by friends, by a whole town. But I'm here because I want to give kids a chance I never had. A place to belong. To be safe. To dream." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't want your forgiveness. I want your support." Gloria studied him, then gave a small nod. "The city will consider your proposal. We'll get back to you." As Ray stood to leave, a woman at the back raised her hand, Lupe Morales. "I just want to say," she said, voice steady, "that it takes courage to try again." Ray looked at her, surprised. "That means more than you know," he said. Walking out of City Hall, Ray felt something new, the possibility of a future not chained to his past. Spring of 1992 breathed new life into Manny's house. The faded blue walls were freshly painted, and the smell of varnish mingled with the scent of freshly mown grass outside. Ray stood in the doorway, heart pounding as the first group of kids shuffled inside. They weren't polished or perfect. Some had scraped knees, tired eyes, and stories heavier than their backpacks. One little boy, about 8, wore a threadbare jacket and clung to a tattered baseball glove. A teenage girl, quiet and watchful, carried a sketchbook filled with dark drawings. They looked like broken pieces, pieces Ray recognized all too well. "Welcome to Manny's," Ray said, his voice steady but warm. "This is a place to learn, to laugh, to make mistakes and try again." At first, the kids were wary. They'd seen promises come and go. But slowly, a spark flickered. A soccer ball bounced down the hall. Laughter echoed from the kitchen where Ray's neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, brought in cookies every week. One day, the quiet teenage girl approached Ray. "Thanks," she whispered, "for not giving up on me." Ray smiled, the weight in his chest easing just a bit. For the first time in decades, Manny's house wasn't just a building. It was a home. It was a chilly October evening in 1993 when the power went out in Elmswood. A storm had knocked down a transformer, plunging the town into darkness. Manny's house was filled with kids doing homework, practicing music, and sharing stories. Suddenly, the lights flickered, then went completely black. A hush fell over the room. A few gasps, then nervous laughter. Ray grabbed a flashlight and led the group outside. The sky was clear and filled with stars, brighter than he'd seen in years. The kids gathered in a circle on the front porch, their faces glowing softly in the beam of the flashlight. "Sometimes," Ray said, "we need the darkness to see the light." The teenage girl who'd once been so withdrawn pulled out a harmonica and started to play. The boy with the baseball glove sang softly. Others joined in, voices blending with the night. For the first time, Ray felt the walls of Manny's house hold more than memories and pain. They held hope and healing. And under the vast night sky, the past and future felt a little less heavy. It was just past midnight when Ray was jolted awake by a sharp knock on the door. His heart slammed against his ribs as he grabbed the old baseball bat he kept by the bed and crept to the window. Outside, under the flickering streetlight, stood a teenager, no older than 17, trembling with fear. Ray opened the door cautiously. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with desperation. I don't know where else to go," he stammered. "I'm in trouble." Ray's mind flashed back to his own days lost in the streets, the nights when no one was there, when every shadow felt like a threat. He saw something in this boy's eyes that reminded him of Manny's spirit, a kid on the edge, begging for a second chance. "Come inside," Ray said quietly. "You're safe here." That night, they talked long into the early hours. The boy's story spilled out. Broken home, gangs pulling him in, a past he didn't want but couldn't escape. Ray listened, really listened, the kind of listening that heals wounds. He didn't promise miracles. But he promised one thing, that Manny's house was a place to fight for a better tomorrow. That night with the boy, who introduced himself as Tony, was a turning point. Tony didn't want the streets, but the streets had a grip that was hard to break. Ray saw the familiar flicker of pain and fear he knew all too well. The days that followed were a challenge. Tony resisted the rules at Manny's house, tested boundaries, pushed away kindness like it was poison. But Ray stayed steady, patient, unwavering. Because he remembered what it was like to be invisible, to feel like no one cared. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed orange across the sky, Tony finally spoke. "I'm scared," he said. "Scared I'm gonna end up like my dad. Or worse." Ray put a hand on his shoulder. "You're not your father. You're not your past. You're the man you decide to be." Tony nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "It's not easy," Ray said, "but the choice is yours. Every day." In that moment, Ray saw something new, a flicker of hope, not just for Tony, but for every lost kid walking the line between darkness and light. One gray morning in late 1994, word spread like wildfire. A gang from the neighboring town was planning to roll through Elmswood, stirring trouble and testing the fragile peace Ray had worked so hard to build. The news hit Manny's house like a thunderclap. Ray gathered the kids in the worn-out living room, the sunlight filtering through cracked blinds, dust motes dancing in the air. The tension was thick, a knot in everyone's stomach. "We've been given a choice," Ray said quietly, eyes scanning each young face. "We can let fear run us, or we can stand together." He knew the history. The scars the town carried from decades of turf wars and broken families. But he also knew something more powerful than fear. The strength that comes from community. That night, Ray and a handful of the older kids, including Tony, patrolled the neighborhood on foot. They weren't looking for a fight, but they weren't running from one either. When the gang arrived, faces set in smirks and knives gleaming, they found a town ready, not with guns or anger, but with open hands and steady hearts. The standoff was tense but brief. Ray stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "This isn't your fight. It's ours to protect. Leave now, or face a town that won't back down." In the silence that followed, something shifted. The outsiders saw not just a former gang member, but a man who had become the backbone of a community. The gang left that night, and for the first time in a long time, Elmswood felt safe. The years wore on, and the wounds of the past slowly began to heal in Elmswood. Ray's work at Manny's house had grown into something bigger. A movement rooted in second chances, in believing that people could change if given the chance. One chilly autumn afternoon, as leaves tumbled down the cracked sidewalks, Ray found himself sitting across from Lupe Morales at the local diner. It was the first time they'd shared a meal in over a decade. She stirred her coffee slowly, eyes thoughtful. "You've done good here, Ray," she said quietly. "Not many get to rewrite their story." He smiled, but there was a sadness too. "It's been a long road. I lost a lot, but I'm starting to find pieces again." Lupe nodded. "Our pasts don't define us. Our choices do." Outside, a group of kids from Manny's house walked by, laughing and carrying basketballs. Ray looked out the window, heart swelling. "Maybe someday," he said, "we can all be more than the mistakes we made." Lupe reached across the table, squeezing his hand gently. "Maybe we already are." One rainy afternoon in 1997, as Ray sorted through a box of old keepsakes in Manny's house, he found something unexpected, a letter, worn and creased, addressed to him in a handwriting he hadn't seen in years. It was from his mother. The envelope had been tucked inside an old book, and the words inside were a lifeline from a past he tried to bury. "Dear Ray," she wrote, "I never stopped praying for you. For the boy who got lost and the man you are becoming. I see your heart, even when you try to hide it. Your papa would be proud. Keep fighting, son. Keep believing in yourself. You're never alone." Ray sat back, the letter trembling in his hands. Tears blurred the words, memories flooding back. The kitchen filled with laughter, his mother's soft humming, Manny's eager smile. It was a reminder that no matter how far he'd fallen, the roots of love and family ran deep. And sometimes those roots had the power to pull you back from the darkest places. The spring of 1999 brought a celebration unlike any Elmswood had seen in years. Manny's house was packed wall-to-wall with kids, parents, and neighbors gathered for the first ever graduation ceremony of the youth program Ray had nurtured for nearly a decade. Tony, now a young man with a steady job and a fresh start, stood at the podium. His voice was steady, but the emotion in the room was palpable. "When I walked through those doors, I was lost. I had nowhere to turn, no one who believed in me," Tony said, glancing at Ray in the crowd. "But Ray Delgado gave me a chance. He didn't just see a kid with a troubled past, he saw potential. He showed me that the choices we make can change our story." Tears streamed down the faces of many in the audience. Ray felt a lump rise in his throat, his eyes fixed on Manny's portrait hanging above the stage. After the ceremony, Lupe approached him quietly. "Look at what you've built," she said softly. "From a house haunted by memories to a beacon of hope." Ray smiled, humbled. "Maybe Manny's not just a memory," he whispered. "Maybe he's the reason all this exists." That night, beneath the glow of old street lamps, Elmswood felt a little brighter. Years later, Ray sat alone on the front porch of Manny's house, rocking gently in a creaking chair. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the neighborhood that had once been a battlefield but was now a community. His hands, once rough and callous from years on the streets and in the junkyard, rested calmly on his lap. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of his youth. He thought about the long journey, the mistakes, the losses, the moments when he almost gave up. But also the small victories, the kids who found their way, the neighbors who lent a hand, the friendships that blossomed from unlikely places. Ray closed his eyes and whispered, "We're all just stories, aren't we? Some dark, some bright. But it's the ones we choose to tell that define us." A soft breeze carried the distant laughter of children playing, a sound that once would have seemed impossible to imagine here. He smiled, knowing that through the scars and the years, he had found his redemption, not just in himself, but in the lives he had touched. It was early morning when Ray stood at Manny's grave, the soft hum of the town waking up around him. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. He placed a small bouquet of wildflowers, picked from the edge of the old park, on the weathered headstone. "Hey, little brother," he said softly, voice thick with years of regret and love. "I told you I'd make it right. Maybe not how you wanted, but I hope it's enough." Ray knelt, tracing the letters of Manny's name with trembling fingers. The memories flooded back. The laughter, the fights, the promises broken and kept. "I'm still trying, Manny. For you, for the kids, for the town that never gave up on me." A single tear slid down his cheek as the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the cemetery in golden light. Standing up, Ray took a deep breath and turned toward Manny's house, alive now with the sounds of children, hope, and second chances. Because some wounds never fully heal. But love, sacrifice, and kindness? Those are the things that make us whole. And in that truth, Ray found peace.